Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the session entitled How to Measure Everything, Analytics for Content Creators. Just some reminders, please keep your phones silent. And please remember to fill out the evaluation. It's linked from our website at webconference.psu.edu. And this session code is C8. And I'd like to introduce to you our speaker, Michael Powers with Indiana University of Pennsylvania.
All right, thanks. And thanks for coming this morning. I named this presentation back in December, and since that time, the word everything has kind of stuck out to me, and the realization that there's only 50 minutes here. So it's everything with an asterisk. It's not really everything we're going to talk about, but we are going to talk about ways to make your content better by measuring it. And by measuring it, I mean with numbers, even if you're not a numbers person, which I think a lot of content creators aren't. Some are, some aren't, but I think there's ways you can do that even if you aren't a numbers person. What you might call we're going to do here is kind of micro analytics. We're not looking at big site-wide kind of stuff. We're looking at individual pieces of content, the numbers we get back for that, and what it tells us about our content and how we could make it better. Now, a little bit about me. I'm Director of Electronic Communications at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. That's about 2 hours west of here. I also teach web writing for higher ed experts. I've been doing that for a year or two in different formats. Interesting fact, I actually coded my first HTML in 1993. I didn't actually have an internet connection at the time. I got some stuff off of Gopher and did it that way. So I've been doing this for a while, longer than my work study students have been alive. I've been doing it full time for since 2001. I also have a PhD in English, which I mentioned just to say that you don't have to be a numbers person to do this. I didn't really think when I got the PhD I'd spend as much time of my days in spreadsheets as I do. And I'm on Twitter at MJ Powers. I'm usually a conference tweeter, but I've been completely silent this conference. But feel free to follow me. It's very low maintenance. About you. Who did I write this for? Really for people who are writers, people who are designers, people who are, for lack of a better term, content creators on the web. And I also kept in mind that you might not be a big Google Analytics user. And there are some people in here who are big Google Analytics users. There'll be some basic stuff in here, but I also help some stuff that maybe you haven't thought about using before. And I really, I teach web writing, so I think about the web writers a lot. And this slide I borrowed from Christina Halverson, who borrowed it from skillset.org. And I like this slide partially just because it shows all the different things that go into making a website. There's so many different skills that go in. I also kind of like it because it shows kind of where we put our content creators, which is out here by themselves, and it's kind of like they don't talk to anyone but the web editor. However, I really think that web writers need a lot of different skills, and I do think that the analytics are for everyone. So if you are a writer, content creator, you should be looking at analytics, understanding how your content works. It's a great opportunity to get feedback on what you write that we didn't have before the internet existed. Now, one more thing about the title. When you start calling things how to measure everything, someone is going to come up to you and say, it might even be a loved one who says this, not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. That is what Einstein said. And while I have a certain sort of sympathy for that point of view, I'm going to ask you to set that aside for this presentation. If you feel that way, you can afterwards go ahead and feel this way. But in the interest of setting it aside, I'm going to mention, wasn't actually Einstein who said that. It was a sociologist named William Bruce Cameron who said that. So, don't give me the Einstein stuff. And also, interesting fact about William Bruce Cameron, I could find no pictures of him on the web. I was going to put his picture here, couldn't find it. So for today's presentation, the part of William Bruce Cameron is going to be played by Grumpy Cat. And I'd ask you not to listen to Grumpy Cat. He will come back a couple times. He does not give you good advice. Instead, I'd like you to listen to someone like Avinash Kaushik. Avinash Kaushik is the reigning guru of web analytics. And he puts it this way: a data-driven life is the sexiest digital life you can imagine. So okay, now you're laughing. So, you may be looking at this and say, this word sexy, it does not mean what you think it means. But if that doesn't work for you, let's do it for your boss. Because your boss loves data, and if your boss doesn't love data, his boss does. Or there's someone up the org chart who would like to see data on how well the content is doing. And if you can give this to them, you are going to look like a rock star. Now, I should also mention, not my actual boss. It's actually Mr. Torrey Malatia. Thank you. The first measure that I would like to give you is one, a lot of them are from Google Analytics, but this is not from Google Analytics. This existed before Google Analytics did. It is readability. And readability scores basically show you how easy to read a particular text is. I'll give you an example here. Here's a kind of famous text, second paragraph of the Gettysburg Address. It's famous, it is moving, but is it actually readable? We can find that out by doing a little bit of counting. We count the number of sentences, we count the number of words, we count the number of syllables, and then we put that through a readability formula. And there's a lot of these formulas out there. The one that I like the most is the Flesch-Kincaid grade level formula. Those are just the names of the people who created it. And you plug everything into this formula, and on the other side, it's going to give you the grade level, US grade level of this text, which is nice because we all kind of understand what that means. Luckily, we have computers, so we don't actually have to do this math on our own. My favorite way to do it is readable.com. I won't go into it here, but Microsoft Word does this, but it's not accurate. So you can drop it into here. It'll give you back all kind of different readability scores. And it comes back with grade level 6.2. So that's great. It's famous, it's moving, it's also highly readable, which is probably one of the reasons we remember it after all this time. So what about text on your website? Here's a little sample of, let's say, some typical website content. I actually got this off of the Wayback Machine, so it is no longer on any active university website right now, but you've seen this before. It's long, a lot of words, only not many sentences, lots of big words. Run this through the readability score and we get grade level 17. Which, okay, so you got to count, that's like first year of grad school. However, you'll notice our undergraduate and graduate classes, this is actually supposed to appeal to potential undergraduates who are in 11th and 12th grade. So we already have that kind of a displacement there. Now, sometimes people are going to look at this and say, well, come on, this is a PhD program. If they can't hack this, they shouldn't even be in the program. I would not agree with that. Just because they can read very hard text doesn't mean they want to read really hard text when they're on your website. In fact, when people are on your website, they're probably not there to read. They're probably there to get done as quickly as possible. Rewriting this to get the grade level down to 9th grade, 10th grade would make your users a lot happier. And this doesn't mean making the text stupid. The Gettysburg Address is not stupid. It's just easy to read. So why do we care? It's going to make your web writing easier, even for your highly skilled readers. Readers can read more, understand more. And Dan Zarella has actually gone through and sort of proved this. Readable content gets shared more often. So if you're interested in having your content shared online, you want your readability scores to be better rather than worse. And solutions. I'm going to give you a couple solutions for each one of these. A lot of those solutions are kind of summed up in what Karen McGrain said this morning, which is write better. And that's sort of what we have here. Shorter words, shorter sentences. That means less passive voice, less jargon. Good writing is going to help here. The nice thing about the score, though, is that it is brutally honest. And if you run the score on your writing, it will tell you when you have screwed up, and then you can fix it. Now, I also want to give you one warning about all of these scores. All of these scores have their inaccuracies. So let's try this. Remember, I do have a PhD in English, so here's Gertrude Stein. A little text called a little bit of a tumbler, and it's not that tumbler. And if you read this, a shining indication of yellow consists in there having been more of the same color than could have been expected when all four were bought. This is the hope which made the 6 and 7 have no use for any more places and is necessarily spread into nothing. Spread into nothing. Now you got it, right? It's 5th grade level, so are you smarter than a 5th grader, right? No, it doesn't work for everything. And this brings us, well, back to Grumpy Cat, first of all. People say, oh man, yeah, it doesn't work. Forget this. I'm not going to do this stuff. The truth of the matter is, got a little quote here from Colleen Jones, who wrote Clout, which is a great book. Data is your eyes, not your brain. So for all of these different scores, you're going to look at the score, you're going to look at the content, we're going to apply our brain and figure out the best thing to do. It's not everything has to be absolutely 9th grade level. There may be reasons for things to be higher or lower. All right, the next couple of scores are all going to come out of Google Analytics. And the report they're going to come from is probably the best one for content creators. It is the All Pages Content Report. You can get, if you go in there, a list of all the pages on your site that have had traffic, along with measures for each one. This is actually from my personal blog, which explains the extremely low traffic. pages from your site appear here, and then lots of measures appear over there. Not all those measures are created equal. There's a couple that I'm just going to skip over. Entrances and percent exit are not so useful for us, so we're going to not go there. But we are going to go with page views, which if you've never been in Google Analytics before, that is what everyone cares about first. God, how many page views? Because they're not going to say page views. They're going to say, how many hits did you get? Okay. Also, not my actual boss, just want to make that clear. But you'll get this question, how many hits did we get? And once you get into Google Analytics, you realize that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. What is a page view? A page view is probably what people were thinking about when they said hits, just how many times that page is loaded into a browser. So if you load it a couple times on your own computer, you get multiple page views out of that. A hit, on the other hand, is just the download of a single file. And these days, a single page is going to be made up of 10, 20, 30 files. So hits don't really work for us anymore. The term is page views, and you're going to look cool if you say page views instead of hits. Now, page views, we want more, right? More is better, and that's one of the things you need to get used to. More is not always better, not necessarily better. If you are getting more page views on content that maybe isn't all that great, maybe that's not such a good thing. On the other hand, low page views aren't always the fault of the content creator. Navigation can also play a part. And this is an actual late 90s admissions page, just putting that out there. They've since changed their name. They've gotten a lot better, different school name. But I would guess that any content that you get to through this probably didn't get a whole lot of page views just because people couldn't find it. So there is a little bit of a way you can say, you know, okay, page views, not my fault. The navigation could be difficult. The page is orphaned. Maybe there are actually no links to that page on the website, and that's why you're not seeing any page views for it. Maybe the link that we were going to send out to all those prospective students that was going to send them to the page, maybe the link wasn't in there, the link was wrong, or maybe the server is offline. There's lots of stuff that could prevent page views from happening that wouldn't be your fault. On the other hand, there are things that you can do to improve page views on that content. If they are lower, they are not as high as you would like, you can improve the readability. You can improve the utility to users. That is, if a page doesn't actually have a whole lot of utility to the people who come to your site, they have no use for it, they will not load it. And of course, you can improve search engine optimization. And since search engines are the ways that people find content, as content creators, we do have a duty to try to make sure our content is readable by search engines. And this isn't just a content issue. There's a lot more to it. And you could sort of say, okay, get the right keywords in the right places, but that's really not enough. This is one of those places where I have to say, we don't have time to talk about all the solutions here, but there are many good resources out there about search engine optimization. Moz.com has the Beginner's Guide to SEO, which is a pretty classic place to start if you need help with that. But that would be one of the solutions for that. Now, I also want to say one more thing about page views before we go on, which is when you actually look at the numbers that you get, once you get past the page views, all of these other numbers up here are basically averages. And that means that if you don't have a whole lot of page views, those numbers might not make a whole lot of sense. And I'll give you an example of how averages can be kind of wrong. Imagine you got on an elevator, and then Tim Cook got on that same elevator with you. During that elevator ride, the average salary in that elevator is going to be $2.1 million, which makes you rich. No, actually, you still work in higher ed. So averages, when you don't have a whole lot of stuff in there, don't make a whole lot of sense. Same thing, and this is again from my highly trafficked blog. We have 7 minutes time on the About page, which is awesome. People are really into reading about me. Except I go and look at the page views, and there's only 3. And one of those is a bounce. And bounces actually get averaged in as 0 on time on page. So this is probably 2 zeros in 21 minutes. And the 21 minutes is someone had to go walk the dog in the middle of looking at the page. So I would not put a whole lot of store. And that's one thing that when you look at this and you see, God, low page views, all those numbers are really not going to be very useful to you. So something to keep in mind on those. The next 2 I like a lot. They're both engagement measures, and they can actually tell you how are people interacting with this content. Bounce rate and average time on page. Now, bounce rate, Avanos Kashik's favorite one. It's a great one to learn about. The next step beyond page views. A bounce is a one-page visit. Came to the site, and then I went to another site, or I shut down my computer. I did not go any further on your site. And so the bounce rate is just the percentage of visits to that page that bounce. So if 36 people enter on that page and you get 23 bounces, you have a 64% or thereabouts bounce rate. And the question is, what does that mean? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Avinash Kaushik's sort of classic line about this is a bounce means I came, I saw, I puked. I did not like your site, and I went elsewhere for my web browsing needs. So that is true. So generally, when you see a higher bounce rate, you would like to have a lower bounce rate. But it's not true every time, and this is where our brain has to come back in. There's some sorts of sites, like a news site or a blog site. Let's say you've got a great blog, and you post a blog post every day, so you're not me, and you have people who come back to your website every day and read your latest blog post, and then they leave. You would have an incredibly high bounce rate because people are coming, they're reading one thing, and then they're going away. However, you would be successful because you would have a large audience, and maybe they're clicking on your ads and all that kind of stuff. So a bounce there isn't so bad. There are other kinds of pages like this, your final exam schedule. If a student comes, looks at the final exam schedule, finds out where their exam is, and goes there, that was a successful web visit. It's also a bounce, so it's going to factor into your bounce rate. So when you're looking at these individual pieces of content, you may look at some and say, yeah, it's got a high bounce rate, but I don't really care about that. When you do want it to get higher, there are some solutions. For one thing, is there an audience that hits this page that has the wrong expectations? Now, how could something like that happen? This is one of those ways. When people find your stuff on Google, they are looking at the actual title of your page, not the one that's on the page, the one that's in the title bar, or one that's on the tab. Often we forget to change that, or we forget to enter one entirely, or we make one and then we change the content on the page to something else, so title and content no longer match. Those kinds of things can lead to a high bounce rate on your site. Is there actually any place to go on the page? Are there any useful links? Are there any calls to action on that page that would actually encourage people to go any further? That's something we do a lot when we find a page that has a high bounce rate. And the last one, does the content actually interest people? And by people, I actually mean your audience. And what you see here is a persona, and it's a persona for a prospective freshman student at a school in Pennsylvania, and just a sample one. And Ashley is someone who might be looking at this content. So once you have this persona here, you can go back and look at your content and say, what would Ashley think about this? These people are bouncing off of this. Let's look at what Ashley is doing, what she thinks, and whether she would actually be interested in this content. Now, doing personas is another thing that's a whole another presentation I'm not going to go into here, but it's one of those solutions. And of course, our favorite solutions, we can make it shorter, we can make it more readable, make it so people actually read it and understand what you're talking about. Fourth measure, average time on page. The average time on page, I hope, is fairly self-explanatory. It's this average time for all the visitors who come to a page. It's measured from when they arrive to when they go to another page. That means the bounces are averaged in a 0. If you never go to another page, they just average in a 0 there. Now, you're going to think, okay, time on page. Longer is going to be better. And sometimes that is true. When your content is really, really long, and you're going to want to see a long time on that to show that people actually read the whole thing. But sometimes it's not. If it's a navigation page like this, you want people to scroll down, find the thing they're looking for, and be on their way. So on the first page, I want to see a really high bounce rate, really high time on page. On this one, I want to see a really low time on page. So what's actually good time on page? The average reading speed for an adult is 200 to 250 words per minute. So let's be pessimistic and use the 200 figure here. Divide the words on the page by 200. That will equal the number of minutes it's going to take to actually take in that content. So on that really long one, 6 minutes. If the average time on page is less than 6 minutes, you know that most of the people who come to this page are not reading the content. If the average time on page for this is 6 minutes, that means that half of them are not reading the whole thing, right? Because that's how averages work. It's just in the middle there. What are solutions for low time on page? Again, making it shorter. This might not actually increase the amount of time they spend on the page, but it might give them time to actually read the content on the page within that same amount of time. Improving the readability is also going to make it easier to do. Making sure the content interests your audience. And my favorite solution, which is deleting the page. because sometimes there's content that really just not deserve to go on, and analytics can kind of tell you that. No one looks at it, no one spends time with it. We'll see some other measures that later on that can give you more indications that a page should be deleted. So you're going to notice some of the solutions are getting kind of the same here. So how can we use our brains a little bit more to be a little bit more creative, find out more about what's going on there so we can craft better solutions to improve our content? We're going to go on a little excursion here before we get to our next measure and some ways that we can find out a little bit more about the page. One of those is by a tool that's in Google Analytics that's called the navigation summary. And for the next couple examples, I'm going to use this actual page from our website, Common Problems with However, Therefore, and Similar Words. This is a page that gets a pretty good deal of traffic for us. It also shows up every week in our top 10 highest bounce rate pages. So we spend a lot of time looking at this page, trying to figure out why does this page have a bounce rate of 95%, and what can we do about that? So there's a couple stops here to look. One of them is going to be our navigation summary page. And if you're in your Google Analytics report, there's a tab up there. If you click on that tab, you'll come into a view like this. And this shows you, and there's a little page. Okay, not very accessible colors here, but over on this side is where they came from. On this side is where they went to. And we learn here that most of the people who came to this page came from outside the site. They were not on our Writing Center site looking for things. They came from somewhere else. And then down there, you can see all the pages that they were on. They're all pretty much pages on our Writing Center site. So, okay, we know a little bit more. The high bounce rate kind of suggested that we had a lot of people coming in from outside already. What else can we do to figure out what's going on here? Next one is segmentation, which is a really powerful technique to use with your content. So back to our favorite report, the All Content report. There's a little thing down there that says secondary dimension, and that is the tool you're going to use to segment this data and divide it up into some categories that may help you see what's going on. For instance, they came from outside the site. So where did they come from? They didn't come from my site. Where were they just before coming to the page? If you go in and segment by source, you'll get a report that shows where they came from. And we can see that most of our people on this site came from Google. The next highest one was direct. Direct means they typed it in directly, or they had a bookmark somewhere, or they're just very sneaky about their browser. Bing, Yahoo, a lot of search engine stuff, and then a couple things here like ask.reference.com. There's a link on that page to our site, and some people are following that link and finding it. So, okay, so most people who find this page and are bouncing off of it are coming from Google. Are they new to the site? Have they been here before? We can segment by visitor type, and we can see that, okay, out of 2,200, 2,000 of them are new visitors. So there's mostly not people who have never heard of Indiana University, Pennsylvania before. Let's assume they're new to us. And then where are they? You can segment by metro area. You can also do city and state and country, but I find the metro one to be the most helpful. And if I do that on this page, I get a list of the most populous cities in America. Los Angeles, New York, San Francisco, Washington, Chicago, Philadelphia, and so forth. So these are not areas that we recruit from except for Philadelphia. So they are not really IUP customers. Let's do one last thing. Are they on mobile? And unfortunately, there's no mobile drop-down segment here, but there is one that's called operating system. And if you look at that, you can see that most of them are on Windows. And if you add it up, about 14% of our visitors to this page are on mobile, which is low for us. It's usually like 25%. So they're not from around here. They come in from outside. They're not on mobile. They're on a Windows machine. This is the kind of place where we can start to make some guesses about what's going on here. And here's my guess. We have people who are writing. They're sitting at their desktop writing on their Windows computer. That's why they're not on their phone. They're all over the country, and they need help with therefore, however, and similar words. They type those things into Google, and thanks to some kick-ass SEO, they find our page, and then they move on. So we've thought about this. And we've made some changes to the page, and we're going to add in some additional links to say, hey, you want to have a whole whole writing session with the Writing Center? You want to come in for an appointment? That's cool. But for the most part, we figured, you know what? 95% is going to be okay. These people are not future customers. They're coming in. They're learning that there is an Indiana and Pennsylvania, and that's probably good enough. So one last question before we go. That does also bring up, what is a good score? And of course, the answer is, everyone's favorite answer is it depends. And when you get to analytics, this really bugs people because we all come from kind of an academic background, and we do kind of like getting graded. And we would really like to know how much we have to do to get an A, and we would really like to get the A. However, that's not possible. You've seen a lot of this stuff, and 95% bounce rate's okay in that case. There's some other problems too, and sometimes people want to do this, hey, let's benchmark it. Let's benchmark across lots of different sites and see how that works. Well, that hasn't worked so well either. Sites are different. Your Google Analytics install can be a little bit different. The goals of different sites are different. And to make it all worse, analytics isn't exactly what you would call accurate. And there's a lot of technical reasons for this, but I can guarantee you one thing about analytics, that the number that you see in there is not exactly the number of people who visited the page. There's lots of ways that can fail. It's as good as Google can make it, which I think is pretty good. But when it comes down to it, take these rulers. This ruler says 40 is here. This one says it's here and there. And we're not really sure where 40 inches is. Now, in the world of rulers, you could invest the money, get a really accurate ruler that would involve lasers or something, and then you would figure out where exactly 40 inches is. In the world of the web, we can't do that. We really have no idea. We know it's wrong. We don't know how it's wrong, which of course makes Grumpy Cat's ears perk up, right? And he says, okay, so all this is meaningless, and I can just walk away from this, and I can ignore it. And meaningless is not the same as inaccurate. And we know the numbers are not completely accurate, but that doesn't mean they're meaningless, because the way we're going to use them is by using them in comparison. We're going to compare previous time periods, yesterday, last week, last month, last year, which is one of my favorite ones. Or we're going to compare similar pages. How does this department homepage do versus that department homepage? And how can we make the lower performing one be more like the higher performing one? So we're past that. The next one I want to talk to you about is my favorite Google Analytics measure of all. It is a measure that is called page value. But for page value to work, we have to have a little bit of a talk about goals. And goals, we all have them. And if we're in higher ed, we kind of have one of these three goals as the main point of our job, right? We're either getting students, we're helping students and faculty and alumni succeed, or we're trying to get money to do that for other two, right? So I'm sorry to summarize all your jobs in such blunt terms, but that's kind of what we do. And if you live in Pennsylvania and you work in higher ed, state school, you also know that all those things are related to money. So they're kind of important. Now, those are the big institutional goals. When we get down to the web, the goals are related, attracting students to the website, getting applications, helping them find what they need on the website, engaging our alumni, taking donations. And all those things actually relate to money too. And it wouldn't be great if we could go and say, hey, this is how much the website has contributed to actually making this institution work. The great thing about Google Analytics goals is you can kind of do that. Google Analytics allows a couple different kind of things to be set up as goals within Google Analytics. And they're not like getting students, engaging alumni, getting donations. They're a little more prosaic. Getting to a page. Did people get to a particular page on the website? Did they click on something? Did they get to more than 5 pages? Were they on the site for more than 2 minutes? Those can be used very powerfully, though. When you think about getting to a page, if you have a page on your website that says, thank you for giving us a donation, you're going to get a letter in the mail for tax purposes in a few days. If you set that as a goal, every time someone gets to that page, it's going to mean they made a donation, right? Because that's the only way they get to that page. And then Google's going to go, ding, and give you one more goal completion. And you'll see the goal completion start to pile up within Google Analytics. Now, to take that a little bit further, you can actually set a value. How much is that worth to you? How much is it worth if someone gives a donation? That's easy theoretically, because it's just if they gave $10, it's $10. If they give $1,000, it's $1,000. In reality, it's very hard to do that with a lot of our existing systems. On an application, how much is an application worth? How much is a visit registration worth? How much is a new student worth to the university? And if you talk to your research department, you may be able to actually figure out real numbers for how much that is. But let's say you don't have real numbers. Okay, you're going to make up numbers. You're going to put some numbers in there and say, hey, I think an application is worth more than a visit, and a visit is worth more than a request for information, and so forth. You're going to put some values, and they might be low, they might be a little bit higher. But this is really going to help you out. And of course, Grumpy Cat is not happy with this. We're just making the numbers up. And so yes, we're going to make some numbers up. They're going to be kind of reasonable for what we know we're doing. And then we're going to use those numbers in comparison with other pages. And that's why it's actually going to work out for us. And that gets us ready to actually talk about page value, my favorite Google Analytics measure of them all. Page value is the value of any transactions that happen after a visit to a page. And I put transactions quotations because no money actually changes hands on your higher ed website more than likely, divided by the number of unique page views for the page. It's probably easier to understand it like this. Here is a potential student's journey through an admissions site. They come to the home page, they hit the admissions page, they check out the Bachelor of Science in Mathematics, and they say, hey, what does it look like at a visiting campus? And they get to the visit sign-up form, and finally, they get to the thank you for registering for a visit page. So real short, and we said that a visit registration is going to be worth $100. What Google Analytics is going to do is go back through all those previous steps and kind of apply that value to the page. And you know, this website only has one visit, so it's easy. When you have more visits, it gets more complicated. But that's the basic idea. Any page that was along the path to getting to that goal is going to be sort of awarded a little bit of page value. Once that's all done, when you go into your analytics, there's this last column here, which if you haven't set up goals, is going to look like this. It's going to say 0. That is going to start lighting up with numbers of dollars. Now, if you were selling shoes, if you were Zappos, those could be real dollars that you really collected. In your case, it's going to be fake dollars that you awarded yourself for doing something good. But that's okay, because you're going to start to see that some pages have a higher page value than others. Some pages, like the admissions page, is going to be really high. Others are going to be lower. You're going to start to see which pages are actually contributing to the things that you are actually trying to do on the website, and then you're going to apply your brain to those pages to try to see how you can make them better. Or, you know, if you've got pages on your admissions site that have a page value of 0, let's get rid of them, right? They're not really helping. Now, solutions for low page value. Is the page related to a goal? We don't want to get rid of every page that has a low page value. Our Writing Center page has a page value of 0 because it's not related to a goal that we measure at our university. You could set up goals for the Writing Center. That would be, you know, getting registrations to come in and meet a writing counselor. But we don't have that. So you may say, okay, this just isn't on the path towards goal, and that's okay. And of course, shorter, more readable, including calls to action. If you actually want them to donate, you're going to have to provide a donate button on that page. You'd be surprised at how often that gets forgotten. Other things you can do, and especially once you get to this level, are usability testing. There's been some talk about that here, right? You find a page with low page value, put it to the test. Have users actually use it, watch what they do, see what happens. And another one that I wish I had time to talk about would be a content experiment. This is inside Google Analytics. You can actually set up 2 versions of a page. Version A, version B, when people come to the site. And it's all, if you have Google Analytics, you already have this set up on your site. Version A, version B, which one of those 2 actually performs better? You can let that run for a month and see which one has the higher page value for you. Measure 6, we are going to get out of the realm of Google Analytics for a couple social media things. And I will say we're going to get to 7 measures here. We originally had 10, not everything, but you know, we only have 50 minutes here. Sharing data. And this isn't a particular measure. There's various kinds of sharing data out there that try to tell you how often is content that is on my website getting shared on different social networks, which is something we would aspire to do, right? If you have information, it would be great if people were sharing your admissions page on Facebook all the time. So how do we actually find out about that? This is a relatively new one that I really only found out about 2 weeks ago. It's called Shared Count. And the nice thing about it is that you don't really need to do any setup. You just take the URL, drop it in there, and I drop the web conference URL in there, and it will tell you how many times it's been shared and on what networks, which is pretty cool. Now, caveats, I don't know how accurate this is. It's not telling me like over what time period this is happening, so I get a little bit suspicious. I don't really know enough about it yet to know how well to trust this. But if you want to do some quick and dirty, you know, put a couple URLs in them from your site and see which are shared more, which are shared less. In comparison, those could actually be useful. The other way of doing this is to use one of the sharing tools. And there's 2 big ones, add this, share this. I've tried them both. I don't really have a preference between the 2 of them. You'll have to work with your web developer to get these buttons installed. So you could say, you know, on every page or certain pages, we're going to have these share buttons. Please share this content from our university magazine. And when people click on the little button, this pops up and it lets them share to various networks. The cool thing for you, and then that should encourage sharing, the cool thing for you is on the back end, it'll give you a list of things that were actually shared from your site. So how many times a piece of content was shared, along with how many clicks backs you're getting from that share. So that's another thing. You can look and say, okay, I wanted this to be shared. I designed it to be shared. Did it actually happen? Now, solutions for a low sharing rate. Couple things. I mean, better readability, shorter content. We know more readable content gets shared more often. Another thing to look at is the metadata on your site, because that actually becomes really important when you're sharing online. Here's an example of a page from a university that does not have great metadata. This is a news story, but when you actually share it on Facebook, Facebook goes and grabs the page title, and it grabs the meta description, meta tag, and it drops it in there. And if those are not filled out correctly, you get a link that doesn't explain what this news item is about at all. On the other hand, if you go ahead and actually fill those out, and of course the list part gets this correct, you actually get a nice little summary, and this is going to show up in people's Facebook feeds. It's going to make people more likely to click on it and actually get you more of the traffic that you want out of that. Of course, knowing your audience is always important. If it's not something they would actually want to share, they're not going to share it. And for more on this, I'm simply going to recommend that you read Dan Zarella's Hierarchy of Contagiousness. I think it's only available on Amazon. It has 2 bunnies on the cover. It's short. And he's done a lot of research, numbers research about, here are the words to use in your tweet to get it retweeted and get it out there, and how to make things get shared. All right. Our last measure for today is social media engagement. And again, this is not one particular measure. There's a number of ways to do it. But here's the idea, mostly taken from the e-commerce part of the internet. If you're on social media, it's probably because you actually want something to happen, right? You want people to give you a donation, you want them to apply, you want them to do something. The way that works on social media is first, that person is going to have to become a follower. If you don't have followers, you can't do anything on social media. Second, they're going to have to become engaged with your content enough that they're interested in it. And third, they're going to have to actually go click through and actually go take some kind of action there. So the place I want to concentrate here is engagement. Followers are kind of like the hits or the page views of social media. Everyone's really excited. We have 200,000 followers, but if you don't have the engagement to back that up, you're not actually going to get a whole lot out of your social media. So the engagement scores, they show how many of your followers interact with your content. And most of them go something like this. The number of clicks you get divided by the number of posts you made divided by the number of followers that you have on that social media network. That's going to give you a percentage of followers who engage with each one of your posts. Now the question is, what exactly is a click? And it's vague there because it's going to be different on different networks. On Facebook, likes and comments and shares can count as clicks. On Twitter, you might want to count mentions, retweets, or clicks on links if you're tracking those through something like Hootsuite. Those will all be counted. So the formula for Facebook is going to be likes plus comments plus shares. Those are all your clicks, divided by the number of posts, divided by the number of followers. So to give an example here, this is posted by George Takei yesterday. Okay, so no one watched Games of Thrones. I'm just keeping track of that. He has 4,165,000 and some fans. So that's a lot of fans. And but on this post, he got 30,000 likes, 700 comments, 7,000 shares. I'm just getting the score for this post, so I'll divide by 1, divide by the number of fans. We get 0.92% engagement on that post, which, yes, many people say this. That is tiny. You must be terrible at social media. And actually, when you share this statistic with people higher, they're going to be like, it's less than 1%? Really? Which is why you go to George Takei and you see what his engagement numbers are as well and start comparing to that. But this is actually the truth about social media, right? You have all these followers, you make a post, and only a small percentage of those are going to actually see that. One of the nice things about the engagement score is that it is good for comparing among different people. So you could actually compare your university's engagement scores to George Takei's engagement scores, because we actually divide by the number of fans. That's accounted for. So if you have 3,000 fans, and you get 300 likes, you may actually have a higher engagement score than George Takei, which actually gives you a good basis for comparing yourself with other universities and other sorts of social media accounts. Now, same thing, if you want to do more than one post, you just include 2 posts. So I've included a second one there about donuts and bagels, and that actually brings our score up to 1.35% engagement. Again, it seems low, and I don't want to say there is an A, but a lot of people seem to think that somewhere around 1% is what you should be aiming for. So these are actually pretty decent engagement scores for Facebook. Now, sometimes people look at this, we likes, comments, plus shares. Some people say, well, gosh, isn't a share worth more or a comment worth more than a like? Shouldn't we account from that? And there are formulas out there that could do that if you want to use that. Varsity Outreach, they've kind of taken over the Most Engaging Higher Ed Facebook Awards every year. It comes out every January. The formula that Varsity Outreach uses actually multiplies comments by 2 and shares by 2. So they actually count a little bit more than a like. A like is I saw it, I liked it, and I move on. That's a little bit more engagement. They also multiply by 1,000 just to deal with that 0.92% problem that makes your scores look really low when they're not. So if you want to apply that to that post, okay, then we get from the old way, new way, it almost doubles it. So you can actually sort of count that. So if your goal really, I want lots of comments, I want lots of shares, you can use that into there. Here's another way to do it. The lazy way. I'll admit that we do this all the time because it is really a pain to go through and look at every post and count how many likes and how many comments and how many shares you get and so forth. This score here, the engaged user score, it is the number of unique people who have clicked on your post. That number is always higher than the number you see publicly because it includes things like clicking on a photo or watching a video or something like that. If you just want to be able to compare your own posts with your own posts, you can just take engaged users divided by posts divided by fans. You can get that out of the analytics in the back of Facebook. You can calculate it pretty easily. The most important thing for this, though, is just choose a formula that works for you and stick with it. Because again, this is all going to be comparisons. You want to know, are my Facebook posts more engaging this month than they were last month? Are my Facebook posts more engaging than George Takei's, right? So we're about to the end. The last thing we need to talk about is how do we actually put this all together, because at some point your boss is going to come back and say, how's our content doing? Actually, he's going to say, how many hits did we get? But let's ignore that, and we're going to move on to how's our content doing. How do you actually report this to him or her? How do you actually report this to yourself? Because these numbers, right, we've got readability, they're coming from Google Analytics, they're coming from Share This, they're coming from Facebook. They're all over the place. How do we actually put them together? And I don't have a really super high-tech solution beyond a spreadsheet, and there's a couple of things blurred out there from our university, but this is the way we found that it's kind of best to keep track of this. A big Google Docs spreadsheet where we put our content in there, and we note, first of all, the day we published it on, and then we look 28 days later, because we find, stuff keeps getting, if you want to compare a news post from 2 years ago with a news post from today, well, that other news post has had 2 years to get hits and all that kind of stuff, so it's not really going to be fair. So we automate this with a work-study student who goes through, and that's how it's done, right? 28 days later, she comes in each morning and she looks and say, okay, what's coming due? What's 28 days later? And then she goes to all the networks and kind of plugs in the numbers for us. So that's the final update complete thing. Just that she puts that in there to let us know, okay, I got all the numbers in there. It's ready to be compared. We go, let's move this over a little bit. So we say, okay, what kind of topic is it? How much is our average time on page? What's the bounce rate? What's the page value? I actually have one that has a 1-cent page value there. And then how many page views? Oh, this is interesting, right? This is our news post, and it's pretty clear from looking at this that the news posts are not of great interest to admissions students. That's no big surprise, but you see it there in the numbers. And then up top, we grab averages and medians and kind of figure out, we can actually say, okay, this one did better than average, this did worse than average. It gives us something to do over time. Now, it is a whole lot of data, and not every boss is going to be happy to see this giant spreadsheet plopped on their desk. But as you are writing content, it's a great thing to refer back to, try to understand what's working, what's not working, and you'll have it there all laid out for you. So, one last shot of the different measures that we have. There's lots of others you could use. I think these are maybe the 7 most useful if you want to use analytics to make your content better. And we actually have time for questions. Yeah.
I assume every time you run these, do these, look at these, you discover a different way or something. The sand is always shifting, yes? Or does it get to the point where you've got a pretty firm set of numbers that you rely on?
Yeah, the problem is that we're changing things on the website, so it can be, you make a change in navigation, it affects a whole bunch of pages, and sometimes that's, again, where the brain comes in to know. Like Mark Greenfield had a example of where they made a change and they had fewer page views, which was actually a good thing, right? So you need to sort of keep those things in mind. But for certain sort of things like a press release or a news post, we feel those are pretty, we know pretty well, okay, yeah, this is average, this is above average, this is below average. And especially on Facebook posts, we've gotten to know, yeah, that's a really great one and that's not so great, even though it got, hundreds of likes. Yes? Mm-hmm. Yes, and there's a couple ways to do that. One that we use a lot is a thing called Google Analytics events. So you add a little bit, you have that button there, you add a little bit of JavaScript code on that and say, and we do this all the time when we're going someplace where we're not going to be able to see or measure you. And then you can actually set that up as a goal. So for some of our sites where we don't have good analytics on the actual application or something like that, our goal is get you to click the button. And if you click the button, we give ourselves the monopoly money and we celebrate, and that goes through everything else. But it lets us see what pages are working and what ones aren't. Oh, one more.
I have a question about your news articles
Mm-hmm.
in terms of sharing that analytics information back with, say, your writers.
Mm-hmm.
We have these discussions about, do we write, and I think all journalistic organizations, whether they're newspapers or others, are having this question right now. Do we write content because we think it's news and you should know about it, or do we write content because we know that you will probably click on this piece of content if we write it?
Mm-hmm.
And so having those discussions and bringing the writers and the people who come up with the ideas of what we want to report as news, pulling the analytics of what we've done in the past and what's worked back into that conversation. Do you have a workflow for maybe they don't actually go into Google Analytics, but sharing, hey, this story you wrote and this story did really well, these other two maybe not as much, and then having a discussion about what you're going to write next?
It works both ways. There are people who write content who do go into our Google Analytics and they have the account and they actually see and will look like day to day, is it doing better, is it doing worse, which may or may not be the best way to do things. But then the spreadsheet is useful for more general meetings because you can kind of print that out and say, okay, here's how we did, or when we did this event last year, here are the numbers that we had. Are there ways we could make that better, to make the headline more engaging? A lot of times we don't have a choice. We're going to do the graduation story, and it's going to do really well too. I don't have any question about that, but there's certain things you don't have a choice about, unlike in a journalistic organization. So we just try to make them better each time. Okay. Thanks a lot for listening.